The result is this. DS not only changes Nintendo, it changes our industry. You'll find Nintendo DS represents a brand new way for players to relate to their games and to each other. Listen to the experts.
When I told the functions of DS to our creators, they were very excited and eager to work on new development. They really liked DS.
It's very innovative technology that is clearly focused on immersing the consumer into the gaming experience.
In 2004, Nintendo launched the DS, their first attempt at a handheld that didn't have the Game Boy name on it. It was successful, and if you know Nintendo, you know the DS, something the company really wanted to make sure of when developing for the thing. When it launched, it had this metallic, bulky appearance, and games were designed to boast its capabilities, aligning with the GameCube and Game Boy Advance, but in hindsight, this was all a ruse. Throughout the next year, Nintendo put out more games for the DS that focused more on lighter, casual experiences, typically under the Touch Generations label. Overnight, the handheld turned from a high-tech game system to a lifestyle device, juiced up with brain training and pet raising and life simulating, ahead of a fresh model revision in 2006 to align with the Wii's softer design. Grabbing casual consumers was the new goal, and now your grandmother is playing Sudoku on the doohickey with the 2 screens and the pen. Developers everywhere took notice, and so the platform was flooded with similar types of brain games and interactive novels. But many decided to get a little fancy with it, caught somewhere between the realms of story-driven adventure titles and newspaper-branded crosswords. We got Professor Layton. Like with all things, this starts with the FM towns. Around 1992, Akihiro Hino, a programmer at Riverhill Soft in Fukuoka, had finished work on the FM Towns port of Prince of Persia, while the rest of the studio was busy developing PC Engine games based on Patlabor and Gunbuster. Hino caught wind of polygonal 3D games getting big in the States. Riverhill were accustomed to computer adventure titles, but were only just getting into console dev on the PC Engine, resulting in Hino's research of polygon-based 3D. The future of consoles, evidently. This tech was demonstrated mainly by American hardware, which was less common in Japan until the regional launch of Panasonic's 3DO. Hino's self-proclaimed research amounted in Dr. Hauser, a technical powerhouse for the 3DO built entirely with real-time polygons. This release marked Riverhill's shift in priorities to console development, and the studio would later be known for Overblood, which took Hauser's full 3D survival horror format and shoved it onto the Sony PlayStation. Following Overblood, Riverhill took strides on 5th-gen consoles, developing ports of Tactics Ogre for Saturn and the Neverhood for PlayStation, while Akihiro Hino took charge on Overblood 2. This would be his last project with the company as, for one reason or another, operations slowed around the end of the decade and ceased entirely not long after. During these final years, Hino and a team of Riverhill employees fled to start their own studio and developed the early PS2 RPG, Dark Cloud, published by Sony. Hino's team named themselves Level 5. Somehow, Level 5 eventually managed to worm its way into developing Dragon Quest VIII for Enix, the point where the studio really hit it big. After the newly merged Square Enix put that game out in 2004, Level 5 set their sights towards self-publishing, and Nintendo's latest handheld was the easiest route for such a thing. I will point to the Bandai WonderSwan for pioneering a subgenre that later exploded, the handheld receiving a number of visual novels that made use of its comparatively high resolution for readable bunches of text. This preceded the Game Boy Advance, which itself had a slightly higher resolution than the WonderSwan, and continued the trend through Capcom's Ace Attorney in 2001. Ace Attorney would later meet worldwide appeal, but early in the decade it was a Japan-only Game Boy game with a relatively mature audience. Sales reports showed that the WonderSwan was initially popular with office workers, salarymen, when it launched in 1999, and I can only imagine the same audience fell in love with Capcom's Lawyer Simulator for its tight episodic narrative and bookishness. Moreover, its writing was influenced by contemporary TV shows, most certainly inspired by the juxtaposition of mystery and humor present in Koki Mitani's Furuhasa Ninzaburo, the best TV show ever made. Please watch it, it's on archive.org. So here's Akihiro Hino, big Ace Attorney fan, hot off the heels of Dragon Quest VIII, going, hey, maybe we could do one of those Ace Attorney things. My old company used to do adventure stuff all the time. It'd be easy peasy. And so development began for Professor Layton, the puzzle adventure hybrid, and Hino unabashedly took notes from Ace Attorney as well as Nintendo's brain training.
What sort of process was involved in the creation of the Professor Layton series?
The initial trigger was the fact that, after we'd made Dragon Quest VIII, we decided, in the goal of creating something as a company, by ourselves. We found that light users were more likely to possess a game system for the sensation of having a popular item, than because they were seeking ultimate excitement and quality from games. So, in order to ensure the success of our debut work as a publisher, we thought we'd need to create a successor to brain training. I decided to create a game that comfortably connected brain training to the rest of the gaming world. I actually love the Ace Attorney series, and used to play the games all the time. Then, when it came time to make Professor Layton, I actually played the games again, inspecting their good points and bad points. We did a lot of research into how we could come out on top, how we could beat Ace Attorney.
This brain-training bridge formed the body of Professor Layton, while the marketing prioritized its star power. The two lead characters were voiced by notable Japanese TV actors Hyo Izumi and Maki Horikita, another choice reminiscent of Ace Attorney in its appeal to TV detective fans. Basically, after taking notes on those games, they took a step further in terms of audience appeal. Even though this was Level 5's first solo publishing venture, their scope was unusually large. Between its voice talent, its basis on Akira Tago's well-known Atamado Taiso puzzle book series, its animated cutscenes by PA Works with Production IG, and the initial plan for there to be a whole trilogy of Layton games, it's clear that Level 5 set their standards high for the sake of impressing new players. Truly, the puzzle surrounding this puzzle game is its complexity in the face of more straightforward influences. Professor Layton is kind of the answer to the contrast of the DS's brand identity. Nintendo kicked this thing off by showing its power as a one-of-a-kind two-screen 3D powerhouse that rivaled Sony's similarly ambitious PlayStation Portable. But quickly that image was flipped around as part of Nintendo's true incentive to widen audiences and reach the ever-elusive family. After decades of marketing to the game lovers, the boys, the fellas, newly appointed president of the company Satoru Iwata decided that Nintendo could appeal to markets outside those dedicated few. By Iwata's own admission, this line of thinking derives from the same sentiments present in the marketing for Mother 2, a game he programmed under HAL Laboratory, for which the tagline declared the game was for children, adults, and older sisters. Needless to say, my older sister owned a Nintendo DS. If this business strategy did not explicitly target such a demographic, if Nintendo hadn't taken the shocking gamble to acknowledge that women play video games too, I would not have had the formative memory of my older sister, who owned a DS before I knew what a Nintendo even was, showing me Link in The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass and confidently explaining that you play as the princess because she interpreted Link's androgynous design as feminine. And I sincerely thank Nintendo for this one time where they got it right and made a device for kids like her. The DS is important for this reason, for introducing video games as something for everyone, even if they insidiously limited such a perception to their product ecosystem, and Professor Layton is by design one of many gateway games for such crowds. Since Level 5 planned from the start to make 3 Layton games, you could easily imagine it to be a sort of anthology of mysteries, set up so any entry can be someone's first Layton game. It's cute, and the first entry in this anthology is The Curious Village. London bigwig Professor Layton and his sidekick Luke receive a letter from a wealthy mistress about the mysterious golden apple, a treasure defined in some dead guy's will to be inherited by whoever finds it. This serves as the basic motivation for Layton's investigation of the titular village, Saint Mystère, and from this premise the ongoing mystery unwinds and becomes a lot more complicated than just this wealthy family's inheritance. and also you meet weird guys along the way who yell
Solve my puzzle.
if you look at them funny. Level 5 designed Professor Layton to be almost too easy to play, so to not scare off easygoing players unfamiliar with adventure games. Because of this, there are only a few elements in the interface that you'd come to expect from the genre, and all those elements are streamlined. So the rules of Professor Layton as a game are worth outlining in contrast to what you may expect from an Ace Attorney clone. Rule number 1 of Professor Layton. The game is controlled entirely with the touchscreen, a common control scheme for DS games, but worth noting regardless, as this simplifies every part of the gameplay. Rule number 2 of Professor Layton. You don't have to pay attention to the story. This is a puzzle compilation first, with story in between, and the game always reminds you of your current objective. This makes it an overwhelmingly easygoing experience, perfectly structured for folks who may not have all the spare time in the world. Rule number 3 of Professor Layton. This is just barely the UK. Son Mystère is supposed to be a quaint British town in the middle of nowhere, the sort of town I've been to dozens of since I live here, and I can safely tell you this looks nothing like any of them. One of the most pleasant aspects of the Layton series is its background art, and how, despite the supposed UK setting, it's stylistically abstract and takes a lot more from European architecture with a storybookish visage. It's a depiction of rural Britain only Japanese artists could form, which makes it pretty special to me and establishes the nebulous anime UK that identifies the series. As the story unfolds, it's gradually revealed that this isn't a mystery game in the ways you'd expect, the investigation leading to a bunch of dead ends and pieces not really falling into place until the final twist. You don't really gather clues and solve the mystery of what the Golden Apple is, and as a player, your role is not that of a participant as much as it is of an observer. You observe unusual behavior from the residents of the town, you observe Layton making deductions out of nowhere, and you observe the ultimate reveal that said residents were robots built to protect the Golden Apple itself. The Golden Apple is actually a girl named Flora, whose father concocted a plan to keep her held in a tower until the right person would come along and find her, and, buddy, I have some strong feelings about the weird Rapunzel shit at play here, not to mention her eerie content with the situation. Like, yes, I was being kept here as the object of a mystery to be solved. All my friends were robots, and my sicko father died with a will that kept me stuck in this town, surrounded only by fake people until some random person would eventually take custody of me, and I'm fine. It's all fine. Look at how happy I am, see? It's an underwhelming conclusion to a story spent under the guise of intrigue, but it's an unusually out there twist. The whole town was robots? It's the kind of thing that leaves more questions than it answers, making for an ending that's simultaneously bombastic and kind of hollow. This foundational tone would continue to identify the series. This is Layton, this is its whole deal, presenting the form of a mystery adventure game only to pull the rug so unbelievably hard you'd be stuck spinning in the air.
Cool. What an astonishing village that was, Professor. Does this mean you'll be gracing the front pages of the London papers again sometime soon?
No, Luke. St. Mystére's secret must stay between us.
Huh?
Purposefully, Level 5 did not call the sequel Professor Layton 2, because that would be silly. It's named Pandora's Box in my region, but that name smells, so I could refer to it as Akuma no Hako if I want to be annoying about it, or meet halfway and use the amazingly fun-to-say Diabolical Box from the US version. Rule number 4 of Professor Layton. The series is victim to some meticulous regional localization that makes no sense ultimately. From small things like the names of NPCs or the way you enter your name at the start of the game, to major details like the titles of games and the voice actor for Luke being inexplicably different between the US and European versions of every game.
Well, your intuition's usually spot on.
Well, your intuition's usually spot on.
I'm not sure why this happened or why they kept this consistent, but these wild regional differences are often the first things to be brought up when talking about the Layton series to anyone from a different country. Rule number 5 of Professor Layton. Though the series was developed and published in Japan by Level 5, overseas translation and publishing was handled by Nintendo, so they underwent the same localization processes as any other Nintendo games of the time. Case in point, Yoshi's Universal Gravitation. While surrounding adventure games had density and complexity and enriching narratives to tell, Layton is simpler than simple. These games do not try very much, most of their eggs being placed in the basket of cinematics and artwork, but Diabolical Box does expand a little upon the first entry in a few ways. The opening of the story is told non-linearly. The game starts on a train which stops at multiple destinations throughout, and the mystery this time around is concrete. We gotta find out what's inside the Elysian box. On top of this, the visual elements are tidied up a little, and the puzzles are more interactive on average. In contrast to The Curious Village, the Diabolical Box is a very clean game, and I had a much nicer time playing this one, but damn it, we need to talk about Flora. Rule number 6 of Professor Layton. Each game is packaged like this is an anthological novel series, but they feature a distinct continuity that rewards playing in order. This is made evident by reappearing characters, Flora in particular, who isn't given much more personality than her initial appearance at the end of the last game. Good going, guys. The game's box includes a ticket that you need to manipulate to solve the puzzle of its missing destination, the city, Folsense, a flashy lit-up ghost town. I need to take a moment to express that this is a wildly well-realized setting, because even past its mysteries in relation to the story, it's some beautifully airy scenery that makes me envy the background artists. It looks like a bubbling, vibrant city, but its accompanying music is great at setting a contrasting mood. Not sleazy or jaded, but worn down, exhausted sounding, as if the city's been left behind and now you're just reminiscing on it, which plays perfectly into the twist that, the city is a collective facade brought about by hallucinogenic gas in the pipes. Rule number 8 of Professor Layton. The twists are usually harder to believe than the mysteries they're supposed to solve. Overall, the Diabolical Box, to me, might be the high of the series. It presents a simple enough mystery in a compelling way, it uses what little atmospheric elements it has to full effect, and half of it takes place on a train. If it wasn't for the following entry having marginally better writing, this would be my favorite part of the trilogy, with enough variety keeping each chapter fresh and background art that solidifies the strengths of the Professor Layton series despite its deliberate narrative simplicity. Its storyline is really the only thing I'm iffy on. If you're gonna play any Layton game, maybe just skip the first one and play this. It stands pretty well on its own. Professor Layton and the Final Time Travel, or Professor Layton and the Unwound Future, or Professor Layton and the Lost Future is the final entry in the Layton trilogy and iterates further on the formula but provides a little more narrative complexity courtesy of a shift in directorial staff. The director of the first two games, Tatsuya Shinkai, stayed only as a planner while directing was taken up by the duo of Jun Suzuki and Usuke Kumagai, so there's naturally some material difference in the scope and tone here. After the outlandish twists of the last two games, I guess they only thought it was natural to have this game be wild straight away. This one's about real, actual, factual time travel. To begin with, this game also entirely takes place in London, meaning we get to see plenty of the artist's stylishly inaccurate depiction of a real-ass place. But Layton and Luke get time-zooped to the future version of the city. It's unrecognizable to them, run by crooks controlled by the future Professor Layton, who turned evil, obsessing over the invention of a time machine that, unlike the one we see at the start of the game, does not explode and destroy the Prime Minister in the process. Damn. This is told to us by the future version of Luke, who we meet in a casino. You know, like the ones all over London, who sent Layton a letter from the future to the present asking for help. The game makes good work of convincing the player that this just is time travel, but obviously the main mystery of the game, beyond why would Layton turn evil, or did that explosion actually destroy the Prime Minister, is whether this time travel is real. You, that is, you as the observer of these characters, are led along by future Luke with seemingly undeniable proof like Layton's old worn down car or the very fact they're in this futurized city. And it's a well executed build up, but if we're gonna go by rule number 8, there ain't no way this is real time travel, pal, no sirree, not a shot. I get the feeling, not just with this game but with the previous entries too, that the storyline was written in sequential order because setting up this mysterious future city and revealing that there was no time travel at all means getting written into a corner only to come up with the bonkers bananas plot twist that the future London was a replica built by future Luke who isn't actually future Luke but a kid who lost his parents to a time travel experiment. Underneath underneath the real London in a giant subterranean cavern, because how else do you fabricate an entire city? Rule number 10 of Professor Layton, there is a giant London-sized cave located somewhere underneath the real London, and it has a Truman Show-style set of an entire fictional future version of the city. The big reveal is about as fantastical as time travel is, because it only pulls up so many questions about how no one noticed sooner that this London was fake, as well as the reasons for using a fully constructed replica of a city just to gaslight one guy, as well as the fact that London is, pretty famously, the city with an entire underground train system, and that goes pretty far down, so none of this makes any sense, and yet it's funny as hell and raises the stakes to 1,000,000 because this future loot guy also built an enormous robot to destroy the city on the surface, and there's just such a grand scale to everything, and it really doesn't need to be like this. Like, who decided it would be like this? It's really silly. And, of course, all this anime-ish drama is juxtaposed by the same puzzle compilation gameplay, so this still does its job by still being a light puzzle game, just a light puzzle game with an absurdly elaborate plot. Like, one of the subplots is about Layton having, like, this long-lost lover who dies in the same time travel accident that killed the parents of the other guy, and it's bewildering to imagine that Professor Layton not only knows how to do romance, but that this whole time he's been grieving his girlfriend. By this point, the Layton games are defined not by quaint, small-scale mysteries, but by heightened drama and literal large-scale threats. With this, the trilogy was completed, but Level 5 had ensured their own success and just needed to keep making these. Lost Future ends with Luke giving a teary goodbye to Professor Layton, so in expanding the series, they had to go and complicate things for everyone. The weird thing with Akihiro Hino's ambition to get Level 5 publishing cheapish DS adventure titles is that they did not need to be this grand or complicated. The DS had an abundance of high-quality adventure game in the same vein as Ace Attorney, so Level 5 taking notes from Ace Attorney and ending up with a completely different type of product speaks, I think, to their style of developing games and their ulterior motives. The concerning thing is that Level 5 were very, very good at making connections. They developed 2 mainline Dragon Quest games, they published the Professor Layton games globally with Nintendo, and by the time Lost Future released, they were developing Ni no Kuni with Studio Goddarn Ghibli. It doesn't take long to look at Level 5's history and draw the conclusion that they weren't really in it to make good quality DS adventure puzzle games. Their goal with Professor Layton was simply to get their foot in the door of self-publishing, extend their operations, and make as much money as possible by appealing to as large of an audience as possible through a platform that was bursting in popularity at the time. It's not a wild thing for a company to seek profits in this way, however ravenous they are behind the scenes, but I'd like to highlight 2 things that make this interesting. The first thing is that the Japanese game industry was struggling pretty hard across the board in the late 2000s. Major exports like RPGs and arcade games were no longer hitting it big, and major companies like Konami, Capcom, and Square either had to gussy up with Western stylings on the PS3 and Xbox 360, or cling to Nintendo with smaller scale titles that were sure to sell. The only caveat being that they needed to be light and accessible to reach as wide of an audience as possible, just like Nintendo's own output. The other thing is that Hotel Dusk exists. Hotel Dusk is sort of a cousin to Professor Layton, not just for being a DS adventure game, but for the staff at Sing who developed it. When Hino left Riverhill Soft to form Level 5 in 1998, not long after in 1999, Takeya Miyagawa also left Riverhill and formed Sing with other staff from the company. Riverhill split off into both Level 5 and Sing before dissolving, and the 2 companies ended up making very similar games, coexisting on the DS, but with radically different approaches. Sing developed another code and Hotel Dusk, 2 Nintendo-published adventure games, so it could be understood that Level 5 saw their cousins producing such games and decided it could work for them too. The key difference, however, is that Sing is way more able to write an engaging story. If it wasn't clear up to now, the Professor Layton series, despite its story being half of its story cross-puzzle genre combination, has some pretty uninteresting storytelling. Even when it becomes more elaborate, it fails to keep me hooked or give me any incentive to keep going. Meanwhile, Hotel Dusk is so comparable to a good book that you hold the DS sideways to play it. I'm in the middle of playing the game, and I've been far more drawn in by its characters and their interweaving interactions. There's a real sense of mystery here, which, despite aesthetically soaking in mystery stories, Layton totally fails at. I know for many people it might seem like games on this platform skewed substanceless and flat for the sake of appealing to the masses, but it was possible for DS games to have gripping novel material. Level 5's approach was just so cowardly and quantity-driven that they didn't ever reach that height. And yet, they demand to be taken seriously. The next game in the series, Professor Layton and the Spectre's Flute, or Last Spectre, or Spectre's Call, is where things kind of fall apart, while also being the most mechanically refined. The Spectre's Flute is a prequel depicting how Professor Layton and Luke first met, meaning that this entry paradoxically works as a player's first Layton game while hinging on players' familiarity with the characters and expanding existing mechanics. It's the first in the prequel trilogy. Level 5's answer to continuing the series after Lost Future ended with Luke's departure, which expands the series' continuity. As with the previous games, it's not a huge deal if you miss some context along the way. It's still really a puzzle compilation, and unlike Lost Future, this is a smaller scale mystery akin to the first game. Oh, never mind, that's a giant robot again. I like this one quite a lot. It surprised me upon replaying how mostly low stakes the story is, how cute Miss Tallery is as a setting, and I enjoyed seeing the mystery of this great kaiju type spectre unravel. If you weren't going to play the Diabolical Box or any of the other games, I'd recommend this game instead, because it pulls together all the best qualities of the Layton series, and I felt less disgusted by most of its NPC design. In fact, let me dunk on the character designer a little. All these games feature characters designed solely by Takazu Nagano, who started on Layton and continued working with Level 5 on their big series like Inazuma 11 and Yokai Watch. Across all these games, there are designs that vary wildly between appealing to me and filling me with dread. The pattern usually follows that main characters in the Layton games are fine enough, and then the NPCs that you talk to are kind of grotesque, but I can't deny that they're all memorable whether or not I like them. Importantly, the Spectre's Flute introduces some new main characters, including friend of the show Emi Altava, this buff detective guy, and a new antagonist, Jean Desco.
どうして爆弾なんか仕掛けたんですか。知りたいですか。ぜひ。邪魔なんだよ、あの観覧車。
Professor!
Get away, Luke! Run!
あれのおかげで時計台見えなくなっちゃった。これが動機かな。
In 1988, Mobile Suit Gundam Char's Counterattack released, the first theatrical Gundam movie and a conclusion to the series' ongoing conflict between protagonist Amuro Ray and my wife, Char Aznavour. Gundam having already been a massively successful franchise, Char's Counterattack was a significant cultural event and a rapid success, standing to this day as an enormously influential work. its Japanese title, Gyakushu no Char, comes to mind with games like Mother 2, which features the Gigu no Gyakushu subtitle, or Kirby Superstar, featuring Kirby's Char-esque masked rival in the sub-game Meta Knight no Gyakushu. It's debatable whether these are direct references or not. It could just be Star Wars. But what's important is that everyone loves Gundam. A bunch of my friends are freaks for Gunpla, and I was quickly drawn into the series because folks would not stop posting about Char Aznable. A little after I put out my Wonder Swan video, which undoubtedly would have benefited from more Gundam coverage, I was infected by Resident Bunny Zone Extreme user Juliet Necro, who, like everyone, would not stop posting about Char Aznable. My curiosity was also caught by the reveal of the latest Gundam series, G-Cux. And it's largely because I saw Hato wearing a little beanie, but also because it's being produced by Studio Kara. The deeper down into this fixation hole I got, and the more that Char's dumb gay face was on my mind, I ended up realizing he's been staring me in the face this whole time. I've been a fan of the Professor Layton series for a little over a decade. I was introduced when I randomly saw the tie-in movie, Professor Layton and the Eternal Diva, uploaded in full on YouTube. At the time, I didn't know that this movie was set at a very specific point in the series. It's a follow-up from The Spectre's Flute, meaning it bridges 2 entries in Layton's prequel trilogy of games, but it generally stands on its own very well and serves as a good introduction to its absurd cinematic storytelling. It also introduced me, however indirectly, to Char Aznable, through Professor Layton's own blatant clone of the character, Jean Descolet. If there's one thing that's blatantly clear to me about Level 5, it's that it's full of folks who just mimicked a bunch of things I guess they liked. For one, the book series that the games' puzzles are based on, Atama no Taiso, was a childhood favorite of Hino's. Hino was a fan of these books and so collaborated with the author when working on Professor Layton. Hino was a fan of Dragon Quest and got to work on Dragon Quest. He was a fan of Studio Ghibli and then successfully pitched Ni no Kuni. He was a fan of Mobile Suit Gundam, and so he got to write a whole Gundam series. I don't know what this guy's deal is, but he was exceptionally good at just getting to work on things that he liked, which is powerful and also really unsettling. Around the same time Gundam Age was being produced, maybe a little before, Level 5 were developing the Spectre's Flute, and with it, this Char-like antagonist. There's absolutely no coincidence here. These are guys that would have been around for Gundam's original cultural boom, who were collaborating with Sunrise on Gundam Age, designing a villain that straight up rips off Char Aznable, because everyone loves Char Aznable. And, I mean, if I could write a Char Aznable type into my game, I would do it too. Akihiro Hino, or whoever's idea this was, simply let their passions out on full display because they were part of a new age of game developers, consuming and regurgitating things that they love. This is not just a display of love for Gundam, but an elaborate parody that means nothing to the audience Professor Layton is primarily made for. And not to be mean, but it doesn't exactly make it any easier to take these games as seriously as they want me to. To be real with you, this video was all a giant excuse to talk about Char, because I've apparently been a fan of him for longer than I even knew. His voice echoes through popular culture. His face is hidden in plain sight. Professor Layton peddled Char Aznable to the masses through Jean Descolet, and it worked. After the Eternal Diva debuted in late 2009, the gap between entries was a little longer than usual. This is because the 5th game, Professor Layton and the Miracle Mask, was being developed for the 3DS and released as a launch title for it in 2011. This means that, as a premier 3DS game, it's got this tech demo stink throughout. I think to a lot of people, even subconsciously, this is where the Layton series ended and a new series of 3D games emerged. While it iterates on the existing formula in a way that's sensible for the hardware, it adds this unnecessary depth. Literal depth, which at best just adds steps to an intuitive system for the sake of showing off how 3D the 3D graphics are on the top screen. Not to be a negative Nancy, I think it's cool that they tried to push the series beyond its limits here, but The end result is sort of a soggy mess. Even ignoring the uncanny character models, the story is my least favorite in the series and structured awkwardly so that half its chapters are flashbacks to Layton's past, and one of them is this extended baby's first Sokoban dungeon with some Heiankyo aliens sprinkled in. What was going on here? The setting also kind of sucks this time around. It's a flashy carnival city in the middle of the desert akin to Las Vegas with more clowns, but this is still supposed to be the UK. It could be funny, but this fact is hardly acknowledged, and as a result it just feels less grounded than previous entries. I can't take any of this seriously, it stinks. I usually hesitate to tear into games, but this is an exception for me. Level 5 made it no secret that they were attempting to expand Layton into a larger franchise when the movie released, and now they were overhauling everything for new hardware in a way that undoubtedly alienated its original audience. Level 5 are not fully at fault for how awkward the 3DS was for games compared to its predecessor, but Miracle Mask just feels like a strange answer to a question no one really asked except, I guess, die-hard puzzle fans who just bought a 3DS for the new Layton game. Maybe what irks me the most about this is how it continues the weird, overarching plot these games insist on. Gone is the loosely connected anthology-ish structure of the first few titles. Professor Layton is now a flimsy Netflix-style TV show that's solely building up to a season finale. There's a whole-ass post-credits scene. Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy is, or was, the final game in the series and a conclusion to all this ongoing, overarching nonsense regarding Jean d'Escalais and this ancient civilization everyone's suddenly trying to get to. More than ever before, it has the least to do with any actual mystery solving, and it's instead a global world tour adventure with Quattro Baji- Desmond Sycamore on this Final Fantasy airship where the stakes are cranked up to a maximum. And I don't dislike it entirely. The amount that Level 5 tried to do here shows, because there's a wild range of environments and a purposefully large number of locations, but, well, if I said this game has Kingdom Hearts 2 syndrome, would that make sense? I love Kingdom Hearts 2, it's the video game of video games, and it blew me away the one time I played it. But its biggest issue was the amount of busy work it gives you set across a handful of non-linear, non-consequential Disney worlds, and it's all mandatory. For some reason, the main gameplay structure of Azran Legacy is kind of just that weak part of Kingdom Hearts 2. You're given a handful of non-linear, non-consequential places around the world to visit, each having its own self-contained episode, and while the variety is stunning and allows the environment designers to go ham, it's just difficult to feel any attachment to any of these mini story chunks. It comes together to form a deeply strange conclusion, which, as of writing, is the finale of this series and pulls everything out all at once to exaggerate its finality. There's twist after twist. This Sycamore guy was actually d'Escalais the whole time. Emmy was actually a spy the whole time. d'Escalais was actually Layton's brother the whole time. And their father was actually this villainous Bronev guy the whole time. It's punch after punch of major plot reveals, entire scenes dedicated to backstory exposition, none of which had very much build-up, if at all. It's kind of nuts to me that they made an entire chunk of the Miracle Mask about Layton's backstory without hinting towards any of this, but it isn't even surprising. These are the devs that wrote a mystery surrounding a ghost town all being one mass hallucination and a future version of London actually being one giant set underneath London. But what does really get me is that this is still Professor Layton. The series that was meant to bridge casual brain training players to the rest of video games. The series that riffed on the Sherlock Holmes and Watson dynamic from the beginning. The series that, by all means, cannot be that hard to mess up. And here, at its finale, I'm looking at a girl from an ancient civilization brought back to life, lore dumping about an army of robots hellbent on destroying humanity because the folks at Level 5 just really liked Castle in the Sky. This is normal for the Professor Layton series. Maybe if they played into all this melodrama, it could be a funny juxtaposition, but there's such a lack of self-awareness, such an inconsistent tone, and just absolutely no sauce. This is the most sauceless series of game stories. You might be thinking certainly the puzzles are the point, the story was never all that serious, but over time these games began leaning way harder on storytelling, and particularly in Azran Legacy there's an emphasis on adventure and cinematics more than puzzles, because not even the puzzles are fun. They're all way too easy. I clicked blindly through half of them. What are we doing here? I can't fault the ambition here. I really don't like complaining, but Layton is trapped in this weird limbo state where it either wants you to care deeply about its characters and its cinematic grandeur, or it wants you to focus on the puzzle solving, and accommodates neither mindset all that well. I changed my mind. Professor Layton in the Curious Village is pretty neat, actually. The good news is that while Level 5 were developing Azran Legacy in the early 2010s, a bond had been formed. Layton was generally a dazzling success, your mother's favorite DS game, an icon of casual puzzles, possibly the most popular third-party series on the DS, but it still had steady competition from its predecessor. Akihiro Hino got to work on Dragon Quest, he got to work with Studio Ghibli, he got to write Gundam, and after producing a full franchise of Ace Attorney wannabe puzzle games, he got to work with Capcom for Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. Rule number 12 of Professor Layton: Layton vs. Wright is good, and you should play it. Honestly, I feel like I've been too mean to the Layton games. It's something I never want to do, but revisiting these games has just been astonishingly bleak, way more dire than I was anticipating. It feels bad when the most interesting things I can say about them are how they kind of just ripped off other things. It's Gundam, it's Ghibli, it's Kingdom Hearts, it's Ace Attorney. Only when it was literally Ace Attorney could Professor Layton truly feel worthwhile to me. Layton vs. Wright being maybe one of the best games to grace our world for its combination of the two series' gameplay and presentation. It's a strong mixture akin to a really good soup, but it is kind of just great to me because it's an Ace Attorney game at heart. A lot of its traits were carried over to the great Ace Attorney spin-offs, which got me thinking about Layton again after I started playing them. Being set in Victorian London, it's an extension of Professor Layton's concept and expands on certain mechanics introduced in Layton vs. Wright. Really, my message to you is that Ace Attorney was just better this whole time.